who's an entrepreneur? That's really our focus, is on the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So good to see a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. I want to give a special shout out to State Senator Diane Savino. As you probably all know, Senator Savino has been leading the charge for cannabis in Albany for apparently 5 to 7 years. I thought it was like 20. Apparently it's not. I mean, just, it feels like it. It really does. She's basically the person that I go to when I'm like, what's going on? So really appreciate you taking time to hang with us, and definitely bother her with all the questions that you may have, and talk to her, because one of the pieces of feedback that she gave to me when I was up in Albany in the spring was, we need more of you to talk to her and other legislators up in Albany, and that's how we're going to make the MRTA pass in 2020. And as always, my mom, thank you for coming. And then I wasn't sure if Donna was coming, so Donna and my mom, sort of two moms, mom and a half of sorts, took care of me for what, 10, I don't know how you put up with me, but I mean, my mom doesn't, so you did. So thank you. So thank you to my mom and Donna, Senator Savino, Gillis, and Vic. So thank you all. And then obviously I need to give a shout out to everyone on the CannaGather team. Many of you have seen them already, but now you know who they are, what their names are, what they do, and none of this would be possible without them. So let's give a quick round of applause for all of them for making this happen. Thank you. And also Yvette. We just added Yvette today. She was on the galvanized side, but now she's with us. So thank you, Yvette. So before we get started, as I mentioned, Adoro Lay, right across the street, free pizza, discounted drinks. Afterwards, let's go hang. We don't have name tags again. John Sullivan brought his own. Very smart move. Hopefully next time we will have the name tags. It's the challenge every month. And then also, make sure to get early bird tickets right now. Go on your phone. Tell all your friends. CannaGather.com/September 2019. We'll talk about who that speaker is and not where it is. We have a new venue. I signed the contract. They haven't, so I can't say just yet, but it's very cool, and it's huge. It's too big. But we got to fill it. We'll work towards it. We'll work towards it. So I want to thank some of our sponsors. First and foremost, Cole Shots. Mark, you want to come up? Cool. Thank you, Mark, as always. Thank you, sir.
Hi, everybody. We usually have a bigger team out at our table out there, but I've got a few teams back at the office working on applications for New Jersey for the expansion of their medical program. And hopefully some of them will be lucky enough to get a license as we expand that program. And what we're really looking forward to is the work you are doing, Josh, and others here to expand the program in New York so that this becomes a regional industry that really can grow and meet the needs of the patient population and remove the stigma and expunge restrictions for marijuana, which really needs to be addressed and taken care of. And it's unfortunate this continues to languish. I think with the effort of all of us here, we can hopefully make this happen.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you, Cole Shots. Bright Map, all the way from Maryland. Brian. Yeah, Brian! That's the enthusiasm we need.
It's a long drive, too. 3 hours. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian. I am the founder and CEO of BrightMap. We are a technology company for the cannabis industry. So what's that mean? The first and foremost thing is, and I think we all would agree, that one of the things that we all want to do is to try to end the stigma. Well, we're doing our part by ending the stigma through implementing cutting-edge technologies for cannabis operations, not only for the compliance aspect of it, but for improved yield, improved costs, things of that nature. As was mentioned, I am a Maryland-based company. We have 2 platforms right now. We have a point-of-sale system and it's really a full retail ecosystem for dispensaries that allow them to run everything that is imaginable on our software, whether it's loyalty, point of sale, e-commerce, electronic payment. That is what we have at our disposal right now, and we would love to talk with you about it. The second and most important thing, or I should say, which really has me excited, is that we're getting ready to debut a product for hemp and for marijuana growers that is going to, in my own belief, is going to really change the industry in terms of being able to manage these large crops that are out there for hemp growers, and also for all of the marijuana growers in states that are either medical or recreational. We would love to talk with you about the vision that we have, and we want to share that with you. We believe that we have this done right. We spent 2 years of development on it, work with a lot of different end users to get to this point. So I'm happy to let everybody know that by middle September, we're going to be ready to go. So you probably saw our table out there. Please feel free to stop by as everyone is exiting and grab some Jelly Bellies, mints, sliders, everything else. It just lightens the load on the way home. So thank you guys very much. Thanks for everyone for being here.
Cool. Thank you. Always an honor to get people from out of state, so thank you for making the trip. A couple of pieces of news. As you may have seen, the New York City DOHMH issued a notice saying that they were going to not be super happy with places that have CBD. So New York State followed suit. Basically, what that means is, unsurprisingly, given the way that the federal law is structured, you can't really have CBD as something that's consumed orally. So topicals are basically fine, but oral consumption is not really a thing. And then there's sort of three basic buckets that it's sort of defined in. So there's the medicine side, so things like Epidiolex, which is Schedule 5 in the sort of DEA schedule, or the Controlled Substances Act schedule. Then you have supplements, and then you have food. And so the ban was primarily around quote unquote food. So if you order like a latte and you have like a CBD shot, like that's not cool according to this quote unquote ban. So that's basically all they're stating, is they're saying, hey, we need to follow the federal guidelines on this. And in particular, they're going to be looking at restaurants, so places that serve food that they prepare on site. A grocery store, for example, would not be something that is under city purview, or at least what I am told, that is under state purview. So New York State would then oversee that, which is probably a little less stringent, but that's not legal advice, and it's still illegal. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Albany over the course of the fall and in the spring, as to if the state might come up with new guidelines that say, hey, this hemp thing's okay, and we're going to govern it differently at a state level than at a federal level, in which case the city could then in turn say, oh, well, we like the state thing better than the federal thing, and so now it's okay. So it's all confusing, it's all weird and messed up, and that's sort of where it's at. If you're confused, that's sensible, but that's basically where it is, you know, not allowed, but you'll probably still see it, or at least until the city or state go after them. And then hopefully it'll change this fall or next year. Congresswoman Maloney's colleague Congressman Nadler and presidential candidate Senator Kamala Harris introduced the MORE Act, which is looking to deschedule cannabis. So that's exciting. We'll see what happens with that, but that was a bit of the news. It's something that's been in the works. I've been told it was basically the worst kept secret in Congress on the Hill, but now it is not a secret anymore. So yay, hopefully this happens. It would solve almost all of our problems. Cross your fingers and read about it, because it's a pretty complicated subject, but basically the descheduling would resolve pretty much everything overnight. Hemp banking is permissible according to the National Credit Union, what was that? The States Act? Oh, sorry. The National Credit Union Trade Association said it's okay to bank hemp. So Is that a surprise? It shouldn't be, but it's a thing, and so it's a thing, which is good because many of you are growing hemp or interacting with hemp-based products, and this is just another stamp of approval in the line towards what is hopefully inevitable legalization. So that's some of the exciting news locally and federally. What's up? Question?
Would that then mean that federally chartered banks, you can put your cannabis-related money in those?
So the question was around federally chartered banks. So could you invest in, could you bank hemp or cannabis? Okay, so to answer both questions, cannabis is still something that the SAFE Banking Act, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is hoping to work towards. There are some, we could have like a whole night on banking. There are some federal banks that do bank cannabis businesses. They basically bucket into 3 different what are called MRBs, marijuana regulated businesses, MRB1, MRB2, MRB3. MRB1 is plant touching, MRB2 works with the MRB1s. MRB3 is probably someone like us, someone that works with people in the industry. So not necessarily ancillary, but sort of like service provider, could be ancillary, but that's basically it, with probably exponentially greater risk the closer you get to 1 from 3. So Safe Banking Act, hopefully that gets passed, and then we can all have bank accounts. Fortunately, I do, but I'm not going to say which one. And then with hemp, this is particularly for credit unions, so it would be different, and hopefully just everyone is like, this is really not a problem. Why is it a problem? This literally makes no sense. Like, it's hemp. Like, I can't even, like, stressful even like talking about it. So hopefully this is a sign that, like, yes, this is fine. It's like, we just passed a bill, like Mitch McConnell just passed a bill saying, like, I love hemp, and like everyone loves hemp. Like, there's no problems with hemp. Like, well, actually, I guess like a lot of industries that are about to be disrupted by hemp being a better, cheaper, etc. substitute good for their products, but they're probably not happy, but hopefully everyone is happy soon, and we'll talk about safe banking later. MGO and LO. Money. MGO is a leading accounting firm. LO is a strategic advisory, insights, professional services, and many other things. So be sure to check them out, MGO and LO. Wilson Elser, full service law firm, global footprint, very excited about the cannabis industry. They are here, and we are excited to have them here. So for all of your legal needs, of which I personally have many, talk to Wilson Elser, as many of you know. Talk to Wilson Elser. Speaking of accountants, so MGO is CannaGather's accountant, and PKF O'Connor Davies is soon to be my personal accountant. So yay! So if you're looking for accounting, you have 2 great options, and the proof is that we're literally bringing them on as our accountants and my personal accountant. So accounting, PKF O'Connor Davies, thank you for your support. Canopy Boulder. So Canopy Boulder is the leading cannabis industry accelerator and incubator. They're based in Denver. And they are doing a very special event, as I mentioned last time, in September, in the 26th and 27th, I believe, which is going to be a day-long program. It's basically like it's a 2-day-long program, which is basically like CannaGather, but 2 days and probably better. So if you are an entrepreneur and you're starting a company, as I mentioned last time, this is something that like we always wanted to do as CannaGather, but it's really hard. So they're doing it, and it's free. So. We love you too, Liz. So yes, if you're an entrepreneur and you're in the cannabis industry, probably if you're not in the cannabis industry too, you should definitely do it. There's literally no reason not to. Vireo, one of the registered organizations here in New York, and then also operating in other states around the country. If you are looking for medical cannabis, if you are a patient or a potential patient looking for more information, definitely speak with Vireo. They also offer delivery, which is very exciting and convenient. I mean, if you like cannabis and like you're here for cannabis, like talk to Vireo because they have cannabis. And speaking of which, who should you talk to about cannabis before you talk to Vireo is Nikita from NP Medical Cannabis. And so if you are not a patient yet and you need a patient card, you speak to Nikita from NP Medical Cannabis, you get your patient card, and then you take that patient card and you go to Vireo, and then you get the medical cannabis. So that's basically how it works. I think you guys are a smart group. You guys could probably get it. So if you're not yet a patient, be sure to speak with Nikita and NP Medical Cannabis. And almost last but not least, definitely not insurance. Insurance is very important. Insurance is also slightly difficult to get in the cannabis industry. So make sure to speak with Aaron from Lewis Chester Associates for all of your insurance needs. Quick at BDS Analytics, Antonio, for all your data needs. If you're interested in knowing what's going on in the legal states and what's selling or what isn't selling, BDS Analytics has a lot of great reports. Splash, been a great event service provider. That's how we do all of our ticketing. Hello Convo helps with a lot of our social media. So they've gotten our following up from about 3,000 to 8,000, 85. I don't know, Mom. How many Instagram followers do we have, Mom? 8,900. 8,900. Thank you, Kim. Thank you. The only person that checks our Instagram more than my mom is apparently Kim. Thank you, Kim. And Kim obviously helped us get to 3,000 and 4,000. So hello, Convo. Trust Capital. If you're seeking capital, David Hess from Trust, rhymes. An Herba Verde group cultivating CBD and THC, hemp and cannabis in North Carolina, operations in New York and California, and Mr. Pepe is here in the back. Hello. Thank you for your support and brought a lot of the team. So thank you, Herba Verde Group. So if you want to become a sponsor, by the way, I would like that. So just email me, josh@CannaGather.com. And thank you to all of our sponsors. Round of applause for all of our sponsors. Thank you. Quick heads up, if you go to CannaGather.com, you'll see all of the events that we have around the country. So obviously this one is happening now. I believe this one is DC, so that's going to be on Thursday. And then also we have Congressman Perlmutter, who's the lead sponsor on the Safe Banking Act, speaking in Denver. So if anyone wants to fly to Denver, I'm thinking about it actually by suggestion of David. Flying out to Denver for that. And then we have some great things going on in LA and Maryland and Philadelphia, just everywhere. Like we're expanding, it's cool, it's exciting, it's very stressful and confusing and scary, but it's cool. So go to CannaGather.com, check out the upcoming events. We have a lot of great programs. Yeah. So next month, we will have Adam Gars from Columbia Care, but in this case, he's the chair of the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association, which is the trade association that represents a lot of the registered organizations, the dispensaries in New York State. Adam's been doing a lot of work in Albany as well. And it's going to be really fascinating to see basically what has been happening over the past couple of years in Albany on the medical side and what some of the challenges and experiences are with the registered organizations and also some of what's to come in the fall and obviously in the spring, crossing our fingers in the spring. We also have Dr. David Nathan. So Dr. David Nathan is from Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. He testified in front of the House subcommittee, as you may have seen about a month ago. So very interested to hear what his experience was like. It's pretty crazy time, but yeah. So we have two amazing speakers, at least two amazing speakers. And the new venue, so I signed the contract. It's in Union Square area, West Village area, in between. It's, as I said, super large. And it's notably going to be on Wednesday, the 18th, if this goes through, which it should, instead of Tuesdays. So we've normally been doing it on Tuesdays. I like to keep it consistent. So fair warning, this one's probably going to be on a Wednesday. And I'll obviously let you know ASAP. But Union Square, West Village, in between there, those two, 9/18. So going to be awesome. Okay. So take out your phones. We got two amazing speakers coming up. take a picture, write a post, share with friends. It is not rude to use your phones. It is encouraged, it is highly encouraged. Share, more people need to know that we exist, that this exists, and all this amazing information. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Dr. Eric Hollander from Montefiore. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
All right.
So, who are you, and what do you do?
Okay, well, I'm Eric Hollander, and I'm professor of psychiatry at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and run this autism and obsessive compulsive disorder research program at Einstein and Montefiore. So we've been doing some studies in autism and in some rare conditions like Prader-Willi syndrome with some of the cannabinoids, in particular CBDV. Also have Vera Nezgovarova, who's a research fellow and the program manager also of the CBDV studies. So I thought I would talk a little about that tonight.
Sounds great. So what is it, just to completely break it down, no pun intended, what is a cannabinoid?
Well, a cannabinoid is one of the metabolites that are in the cannabis plant or also in the hemp plant. So as you know, there are lots of different metabolites. We have phytocannabinoids that are derived from plants and endocannabinoids that exist within our body, in the central nervous system or in the immune system as well. And each of these different metabolites have slightly different effects. The studies that we're doing with CBDV or cannabidivarin, we are working with GW Pharma, and they've extracted this one particular metabolite from the cannabis plant. And so we're taking a look at what are some of the clinical symptoms that may benefit in some of these conditions.
So feel free to encourage me to switch to the PowerPoint whenever. But I guess one question that I'd have is, how did you go from being a researcher and a thought leader in the world of autism to saying, hey, let's try cannabinoids?
Well, I guess I've been doing research in autism and related conditions for about 30 years. And there are a number of different treatments that have some benefit in this population, and there's a huge unmet need. Of all the conditions that we work with, people with autism can present with a lot of aggression or self-injury. They can present with very severe compulsive behaviors. They have all kinds of social communication difficulties. And the current treatments that are available either are associated with some side effects or don't really get at the core symptoms of the condition. So we thought about this. We have this idea that some of the treatments that we're working with influence two basic mechanisms. One is the balance between excitation and inhibition in neurons and in the cortex. And CBDV or CBD have a positive effect on this excitation-inhibition balance. And then we also know that the immune and inflammatory system may be activated in some individuals with autism and related conditions. And so some of these cannabinoids like CBDV and CBD may decrease immune inflammatory activation, and so could be helpful. We thought about this and then put in a grant to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense has this congressionally mandated medical research program, and they have an interest in autism because families that have children with autism have difficulty serving in certain forward bases because they need a lot of services. So it affects things like military readiness. So we thought that based on some of the animal model work that this could be helpful, and we were successful in getting the grant, and now we're doing the study.
That's amazing. So you said that it was working with animals, but why weren't you like, here's some antidepressants, here's some other pharmaceuticals? Why was it like, oh, let's throw like some CBDV? Like that seems like a pretty random choice.
Well, I mean, we've done a number of studies before with serotonin reuptake inhibitors or anticonvulsants or atypicals, and there's some benefit, but there are some side effects, particularly in this population. So there's a big unmet need. And so families with kids with autism have difficulty going to restaurants or riding on a bus or in the subway because of these disruptive behaviors. So there's a big unmet need, and there are some basic mechanisms that play a role in these conditions that some of these compounds can address.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Is the conversation with patients and their families difficult when you introduce the idea of quote unquote cannabis as a medicine?
Well, surprisingly not. I mean, we've recruited, a large number of families for different studies over the years. There's actually a lot of interest in the community around the use of cannabinoids and medical cannabis. And I would say that in some states, like Pennsylvania or Rhode Island, so there's a medical indication for cannabis for autism. The problem is that there's not much data, so there haven't been good controlled studies yet about the safety or the effectiveness. Families are turning to it because they want something that can help their children now, but there's not a lot of data that currently exists.
And what do you think should be done about that?
Well, I think it's important to increase sort of information, to generate evidence so that clinicians and families can kind of review that and think about the risks and benefits and the particular target symptoms for their children, and then based on that, have a informed discussion and kind of work together to strategize in terms of different treatment options.
So the obvious challenge with that in the US is that it's Schedule I. There's no proven medical benefit, and therefore you can't actually test on it unless you're, Sue Sicily with crappy weed doing one study. So what are your thoughts about this idea of you as a healthcare professional and thought leader, what should we do legislatively, I guess?
Well, this is a heavily regulated area, as you know. So, we obtained a Schedule I license from the DEA and the Bureau of Narcotics and worked closely with the Food and Drug Administration to get an investigational new drug application. We had lots of regulatory hurdles that we had to work through. And I think researchers doing work in this area around the country do have those kind of challenges in terms of dealing with what are currently Schedule I drugs. I do think that, once there's a medical indication, well, just like with Epidiolex or that particular form of CBD for these two rare forms of epilepsy, if there's a medical indication, then the scheduling will differ.
But do you think that the current system should change?
Well, I do think that there really has to be a lot more research. There are some real potential benefits. We have an interest in doing studies in obsessive compulsive disorder and other related conditions. So there is a need for more information. There are a lot of challenges for researchers working in this area. So many medical centers and individual investigators have a hard time dealing with all of the regulatory issues.
Do you want to open it up for questions, or do you want to jump into the presentation?
We could take a couple. We can go through the slides quickly. I was going to mention that we have, maybe I can sit there and I can drive it quickly. So the Department of Defense has interest in this area. GW provides us with a compound, and we also have funding from the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research. And I'll mention that briefly. Vera Nezgovarova is here from our research. So we've been interested in autism.
Where am I? This was one of the questions that I had. Would you say right there?
Where are you?
Yeah, I was speaking with my psychiatrist about this. He's like, where am I? At the end of the event, just tell me where I am.
Okay.
It'll help my mom sleep at night too.
I think I have to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay, so we got another half an hour or so. How much, do you take insurance? You take I'm on Oscar. I don't know.
Okay. So, everybody who has this condition have some social communication difficulties and some repetitive behaviors. But they can have a lot of obsessive compulsive behaviors, they can have seizures, they can have severe aggression and impulsivity and self-injury. A lot of them have attention deficit disorder symptoms. They present at different ages with different symptoms. So sometimes they come in because they're not talking, but many times they come in because they're aggressive to other kids, or they're injuring themselves, or having temper tantrums, or severe, rigid, compulsive kind of behaviors. So we've done various studies with different kinds of treatments, and there is some benefit with different treatments. Newsweek did a story called The Blunt Truth About Weed and Autism, and here's someone at Charlotte's Web farm. So families have been turning to different cannabinoids to treat some of the symptoms. These are phytocannabinoids, so they come from a plant. CBDV has effects opposite to THC, so you don't get high from the CBDV. You get high from THC. It doesn't really have THC in it. It doesn't actually bind to the cannabinoid receptors that THC binds to. As I mentioned, it decreases excitation and enhances inhibition in the brain and decreases inflammation and immune activation. So there are some studies that show that the endogenous cannabinoid system seems to be out of whack in these conditions, and some animal models that show if you give CBDV, it can help with seizures in some animals. It can help social functioning in some specific animal models. It can help with grooming or compulsive behaviors, and it can help with cognition. And there was one earlier study with CBDV in some patients with epilepsy. Some of them had issues. So these are the cannabinoid receptors that are in the neurons and in the immune system. The endogenous cannabinoids from our body bind to those receptors. The plant-based cannabinoids like CBDV don't bind to those receptors. They bind to different receptors. And there are a lot of these cannabinoid sort of structures in neurons, but they're also in blood cells, and they're in glia. So glia comes around the neurons. The glia can be activated when the immune system gets activated, and these cannabinoids play an important role in the glia as well. And when people are facing stressful situations, their endogenous cannabinoids can increase. When you have an increase in your endogenous cannabinoids, it can have an effect on your mood or anxiety. It can cause the liver to break down lipids, for example, can affect appetite, and it can affect inflammation. And in the reward center in the brain, the basal ganglia, the ventral striatum that's involved in addiction, there are a lot of these cannabinoid receptors in that region as well. So in the study that we're doing, we're going to study 100 children who have autism, who have high irritability. So they explode or have temper tantrums or aggression. We treat them for 6 months, and we're doing the study at Montefiore, Einstein, and there's also a site at NYU. We had to go through a lot of regulatory hurdles and all kinds of security-related issues to do this kind of research, but it's possible. And then we have some measures of how severe the irritability is, and their compulsive behaviors, and their social functioning. We go up to a maximum of 400 milligrams twice a day, so up to 800 milligrams, but it's based on weight. So it's 2.5 milligrams per kilogram for the first week, 5 milligrams per kilogram BID the second week, 7.5, and then 10 milligrams twice a day to get up to that type of a dose. And again, this compound doesn't have THC in it. We think it has fewer side effects than some of the other treatments. It's not medical marijuana. So again, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania have indications for medical marijuana for autism, not New York State. And ultimately, we're going to be personalizing our treatments based on the particular characteristics of the individual. and their background. And then we're also interested in Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a rare syndrome where these kids have severe hyperphagia and they can become very, very obese. But they have terrible compulsivity and a lot of temper tantrums and some social difficulties as well. One problem with autism is there's more than 200 genes that play a role. This is a syndrome where there's one specific region on chromosome 15 that seems to be affected, so it's more homogeneous. So we're doing the same study with CBDV to look at the compulsive eating as well as the irritability. And CBDV may have some favorable metabolic and appetite effects as well. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hollander. Thank you. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for coming. One more round of applause. One more round of applause. So I am a constituent of Congresswoman Maloney, and I sort of interned for her when I was 14. She didn't really know. I interning someone affiliated with her, and I was basically one of those people that would go out on the street and say, "Excuse me, are you a registered Democrat?" That was me, so here we are. I don't know what's more surprising, me doing something cannabis related or you doing something cannabis related, but here we are. And thank you. So I guess introduce yourself to folks here who may not know you.
I'm Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, and I represent the 12th Congressional District in Congress, which includes portions of the east side of Manhattan, Astoria, Long Island City, Queens, and also Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I'm the mother of two extraordinary daughters, one of whom is a good friend of Josh's, and
Hi,
the
Virginia.
widow.
She lives in California, so she gets a pass for not coming, but my mom was very disappointed that she
And I feel that it's long past due that we legalize the recreational cannabis.
I agree. So how did you become Congresswoman Maloney? What is the story? Because I thought it was interesting, and everyone here should know.
I was a teacher in Harlem, in East Harlem, and the program lost its funding. So they had an election for who would represent them in an effort to restore the program. My first election, and I was elected. I was in a total minority district, and they elected me. And I was very honored and went down, and we went to Albany, and I was very successful at lobby, is getting in to see people, as you are, and coming back with a strategy on how to get things done. So I became a lobbyist for the program and worked very hard. It was refunded, and you could see the incredible power of government. If a legislator has more power than the head of the education department in terms of education, if they care about it and legislate it, setting standards. So I wanted to go back and work in government. I went back, I worked for an assemblyman and then worked for two speakers and the Democratic leader of the state Senate before running for the city council. I served on it for 10 years, and I could see that they had cut Reagan and Bush aid to the city of New York by an astonishing 75%. We couldn't do anything but cut. Unfortunately, in America, if you don't like something, you can run for office, you can speak up. I ran for office. I challenged a 15-year incumbent Republican who outspent me 4-1. And my whole theme was, who needs a congressman who goes to Washington and votes against his city? And just a whole track record of him voting against the great city of New York. And I didn't like the leadership in Washington. I didn't expect to win. I beat him, and it was called the biggest upset in the nation that year. I only spent $250,000. But anyway, I went to Congress. I'm still in Congress, and I serve, hopefully, many of you. How many of you live in the 12th District? Awesome. Good. Great.
Good amount. I thought the story that you shared last time I saw you about how you basically just camped out in Albany, I thought was very salient and relevant for all of us, given what's going on in Albany for cannabis. Can you share that tale?
Well, I met Josh, and he told me that he was working on this effort. By the way, the real expert is Senator Savino. There she is.
She got a better view. She got a better view.
My good friend, Senator Diane Savino, was one of the leaders in Albany, and it looked very close. I was getting reports that we might win, and I just told Josh, there's no way you're going to win if you're not there. You've got to be right there the whole time. Just to give the example of my program, I was told that we were funded and that we had the money. It was in the budget. I went back. A more senior teacher said, go back and spend the week there and the weekend and make sure that it passes. And I went back to Albany, and sure enough, some of my friends told me it had been cut out of the budget. I then immediately worked to get it back in the budget. But I guess the point of this story is you have to do it yourself. You can't rely on anyone else. You can't believe it's going to happen. You have to really be there yourself. And don't believe that you can't play an important role in making it happen through your own personal experiences and taking your story to your legislators of why you think it's important and giving them really scientific information and other information that helps build the case.
Yeah, and that story was really salient for me. I basically was going to go up there and I was going to visit, and then I heard you, and I was like, no, I'm going to spend a lot of time there. And unfortunately, I don't have that much clout, if any. But it was well worth it. I got to meet a lot of people, got a lot of great exposure, and as you said, like everyone in this room can really play a major role, especially because like one of the major players in Albany Cannabis is standing right there. So it's like, just literally talk to her. It's that easy. And then likewise, from a federal standpoint, probably the most interesting piece of legislation that's up for grabs, debate, what have you, is the Safe Banking Act, and you sit on the Financial Services Committee. So I'd love to hear more about that.
The Safe Banking Act is really one of the most important pieces of legislation for investors to follow and to watch. I believe it will pass through the House this year. It has been the top focus of Congressman Perlmutter from the great state of Colorado. He's worked very, very hard on it. Every single bill that I pass out of financial services, true story, he always comes to see me. Carolyn, can we attach the cannabis bill? This has been happening for years. A lot of times when legislation moves, a lot of people attach things to it. But he is an ardent advocate and has worked very, very hard for it. The Democrats came to power. It was one of the first bills that we debated. It was passed out of the Financial Services Committee with a unanimous vote of the Democrats and 11 Republicans. Very important. We got more Republicans than we thought we'd get. And you have to have both houses. If you're not working both houses, you're not going to win. We've passed so many good bills. One of the few bills that got through both sides was my 9/11 health and compensation, victims' compensation bill, giving support to our first responders. And it passed overwhelmingly in the House and in the Senate. Perlmutter has a very strong Senate, a Republican sponsor in Gardner. And he's working very, very hard. I believe that when we come back in the fall, that it will get through the House. Then you'll have a struggle in the Senate. But it's a very important bill. There's a consensus building with Treasury supporting it off the record. But when you talk to them, Federal Reserve supporting it because it's needed. It's very dangerous to have large amounts of cash that's not banked. It's dangerous to whoever has it. It's dangerous to society, and it should be in a bank. The problem is if it's not legal federally, then they can't really use the federal banks. They can't bank it, and this bill would allow that to happen. And I believe the Federal Reserve, Treasury, the executive branch, and hopefully the Senate will pass it. But it's very, it's very exciting in many ways because you never know what's going to happen. I was just talking to Diane, and she was saying how things were happening and breaking down. You actually should come over here and tell the story of Albany, Diane, Senator Savino. But you think one thing is happening, and then all of a sudden you hear it's not, and then you have to have a strategy to combat it. Just like when I was a teacher, my program was cut, then they put it back in, then they take it out, they put it back in, and you have to keep watching what's going to happen and be part of trying to push it forward. But as I said, I do think that bill will pass the House. I'm not as good a gauge on the Senate, but if the public opinion of the country is there and it's moving in that direction, I believe that we will legalize eventually cannabis on the state level and on the federal level. There are actually two bills, not only the Nadler-Harris bill, but Cory Booker and Barbara Lee have a bill in also that would legalize it on the federal level. And I think you have to do what we say in Congress is the drumbeat, where you keep making the case over and over and over again and slowly convincing a majority of people to support it. I have a great deal of respect for anything that can get through the United States Congress, that can get that. People think that we're down there, passing bills right and left. Believe me, it's very, very difficult to get what I call that fragile flower of consensus that gives you the majority of votes to get through it, not only in the House, the Senate, and Treasury then will weigh in on it, and obviously the executive. So our founding fathers didn't trust us, so they built in elected officials. They built in all kinds of checks and balances and ways to stop. It's very easy to kill something. It's very hard to pass it. As Johnson said, any idiot can kick down a barn. It's much harder to build a barn. That's President Johnson. But it's very hard to make that happen. But I think it's going to happen because the science is there, the need is there, particularly on the medical side, and the growth is there. And many times it's an unusual item that kills something. Diane was saying that in the legislature, one of the things that killed the bill this last time is certain areas wanted to opt out. So that was hard to have certain cities or boroughs opting out of what is supposed to be a statewide program. And also there was a lot of discussion of who should control it or be the people involved in managing it in the state, and many people wanting it to go to neighborhoods of need and people of need and having them be the beneficiaries of it. So there were a lot of really different opinions between the executive branch and I'd say the legislative branch. But federally, the bank bill is a very, very important one. You can't really move forward unless you have a banking system that protects investors and protects individuals and really provides the commerce and the backbone of it.
Yeah, in terms of the opt-out, show of hands, anyone live in Long Island? Okay, let's talk. Let's talk. So that was actually going to be one of my questions is how do you actually get something done? I think to your point, the Senate is a lingering question mark. I think there's something like 208 co-sponsors in the House. So it should pass in the House. The question is going to be in the Senate. You, a Democrat in a Republican Senate, were able to get the VCF bill passed. Thank you for that. How did you do it? And how does one, especially a Democrat now, get something through Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, and that whole team?
You have to, the key is to come out of the House with a lot of Republican support. Any bill that passes the House in a partisan way, and we've passed many bills that all the Democrats are for it and all the Republicans are against it, that's going to McConnell's graveyard. So the key is to get many Republicans. I believe that it will pass almost uniformly with Democratic votes, but the key is to get more Republican votes. So on my 9/11 bill, I had 330 co-sponsors and an astonishing 80 Republicans. So the minute it got to the Senate, it was really very, very strong. And then numbers count. We got 64 senators to co-sponsor the bill. So once you had 64 co-sponsors, you had enough votes to pass it. And of course, the gatekeeper is McConnell. So start working on Senator McConnell, and I believe that all legislators listen to the people they represent more than anyone. That if someone comes to see me that I represent, I pay total attention because that's my job. It's my job to be their voice in Congress. So you need people from Kentucky to reach out and go to their senator in support of this goal. That's very, very important. And then, of course, he listens to the people he represents. Boehner, I've been working on a lot of bills, and I would approach the former speaker, Boehner, Republican speaker. I'd always try to lobby him myself and walk up and talk, and he would always say to me, "Speak to me through my members." In other words, he didn't want to hear from Democrats. He was saying, bring the Republicans along with you. I want to hear from Republicans. But he always said, speak to me through my members. So you've got to, really, the one way you could help this bill pass, the one critical way you could really help is to reach out and get as many Republicans as possible on the bill. Like, do you have all of the Republicans from New York State on the bill?
Still working on it.
Still working. Okay, you've got more work to do.
A lot of work to do.
You've got to get a strong Republican vote, and if you do, you can pass it. They control the Senate. That's the reality of it. But if you get 64 co-sponsors, you've got enough votes to pass it. So, as the former speaker I used to work for, he said, once you have them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. So. So Senator McConnell, when we had the number of votes already on the bill on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democratic, once you could get it to the floor for a vote, it's going to pass. But we thank him. I'm grateful that he supported the bill. And I'm talking about the 9/11 bill. And you have to work very hard to make sure that he supports your bill.
In terms of listening to your constituents, how have your views on cannabis evolved, and how have your constituents' views on cannabis evolved?
Well, it's changed dramatically over the years. At one point, it was considered it still is a Schedule I DEA designated, same as heroin. It shouldn't be the same as heroin. It's ridiculous.
It's worse than cocaine.
I know that should be changed, but it was treated like it was this dangerous drug. But now we know from the science, from the doctor and others, that it's very helpful medically, and it's not dangerous to health from what they've seen. So that's changed. So at first it was moving, I think 33 states have passed legislation for medical use. And the stories that I hear from caregivers and patients and doctors of how useful it is and positive, that you don't want to keep from someone something that can be positive. And it's changed in the acceptance of research. I think research is very important. And I'd say how we passed the 9/11 bill was the human stories. We named the bill after 3 first responders. We lost 3,000 on 9/11, but we are losing thousands more since because they were exposed to the deadly toxins and government told them it was safe. So I kept naming the bill after survivors, first responders that risked their lives, saved the lives of others, and lobbied hard for the bill. So it's the James Zadroga, Ray Pfeiffer, Luis Alvarez, great leaders for the passage of it, all of whom had a personal story that was compelling. When you talk statistics, a lot of times people don't react as much as with a human story of how it can be helpful to people. A big argument, Diane tells me, in the state legislature was the economic benefit, the taxation of it to help fund education and other needs for society. So I think you need to work on your research and your talking points and devise a strategy and execute it. And don't think that one person can't make a difference. If you look at the world, it's usually one committed person that makes tremendous change in so many areas. And I believe that we have a very good chance of passing the SAFE Act in Congress now and building a consensus. If you had Treasury and the Federal Reserve attacking the bill, then it would probably be dead. But they're not. They're basically not saying anything, which means they're supporting it, in my opinion. So I think building that consensus and educating and being unified and a strategy and working together to make it happen.
There's been, I can't even put it into words, a ridiculous number of mass shootings, particularly, over the last week or week and a half. So gun violence is top of the list when it comes to news headlines and politics. And a New Yorker who's very anti-cannabis through his one of his mouthpieces in an op-ed in a major publication, which doesn't need to be named, tried to attach cannabis consumption to gun violence. Is this even a conversation? Is there any thought at a congressional level about any of this? I'd love
This is
to.
the first time I've ever heard it, and it's totally ridiculous. But you're right. It's astonishing and disgusting that America stands alone in the world in terms of our mass shootings. Other countries don't have this challenge. The country that is next to America in the number of people that are killed by guns is Sudan, and they're in a civil war. But if you look at England and Japan and China and Russia, you name it, Europe, it's practically zero. What happened in New Zealand? They had a mass shooting. They called their legislature in. Within 1 week, they banned killer magazines. They banned the machine guns that are used for war, that are just designed to kill as many people as possible. It is outrageous beyond belief what is happening in this country. The mass shootings that can be prevented. When you look at so many problems we don't have the answer to. What's a cure for cancer? We know what to do about these guns. Get these killer guns off the street. Now, getting a permit for a handgun for self-defense, fine, or a rifle to go hunting. But war machines, machine guns, AK-47s, why are we letting children buy them without background checks? Now, we've passed a bill for background checks and closing loopholes for it, and we should ban assault weapons as we did in the 90s and all of these. Now, in Dayton, the police officer did his job. He killed the guy within 30 seconds. But within 30 seconds, the killer, the terrorist, and this is domestic terrorism, the terrorist killed 10 people and injured 30 with a spray gun. So it's I think that we should be passing common sense gun reform. I think it's criminal that we haven't. And I would say if guns made us safer, we'd be the safest nation on earth. We have more guns per capita than any nation on earth. And so it's far from it. We're the most dangerous country on earth. Our children go to school with drills for the killers coming. Run into the closet. It's outrageous. I had a constituent come up to me over the weekend. They're saying they're afraid to go to Walmarts. This is America. We can control these guns with gun safety and background checks and other steps, and we should. And I think it's outrageous that our president and the Republican leader are not acting on it. And I would say their inaction is literally killing Americans.
Thank you. So I guess one final question from me. I think you've sort of answered it, but what is your recommendation to the people in this audience as they're approaching the world of cannabis industry, politics in general?
Get involved and reach out to your legislators and talk to them about it. They represent you and educate them to your point of view. I think that you have to develop research that they can use that is totally researched and valid. If you make one mistake, you're really in trouble. You got to make sure your data is absolutely correct. And your legislators represent you, and they will be making that decision. So you need to reach out to them and talk to them and build your coalition and work with them. And I think that we're going to pass, as I said, the SAFE Act this year, which is important for banking. That is a big step forward because that's recognizing cannabis really as a legal item that should be banked and investors that should be protected. And it's a very important step forward. So what do they say? Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to keep perseverance. You just have to keep working on it every single day and thinking of ways to push it forward. We have a term, I call it in my office, the drumbeat. Keep raising the issue, the drumbeat. Keep raising it and educating people and building your coalition and building your support and your arguments for it. And focusing also on the leadership in the legislature, in the state, and federally, because ultimately they can control what goes to the floor for a vote. So you have to work so many areas. I had such a great time meeting you. Good to see you, Josh.
I just want to say...
I have one more meeting tonight. Can you believe that?
Wait, really? Oh, working. I just want to say this is super cool. So thank you to my Congresswoman, Carolyn B. Maloney, for coming out.
So thank you to my friend. Thank you to my friend. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.